What's up, team, and welcome to this module where we're going to be talking about alcohol and how it's going to impact or relate to your fitness goals, weight loss goals, and your lifestyle changes overall. Now, I think this is going to be a different conversation than most people anticipate when it comes to alcohol, because as functional health lifestyle coaches, we get a bad rap for just smacking people on the wrist for drinking alcohol when it really is a much more complex relationship with that. So we are going to dive in because if you are somebody who maybe you're struggling with grabbing that glass of wine or too many glasses of wine before bed to wind down and you can't seem to kick the habit, or if alcohol is something that is not an every night thing, but whenever you do have it, you tend to go overboard and it tends to derail you for, let's say, the whole weekend and leads to a lot of overeating, we're going to break down basically how to stop this pattern from getting in the way of your goals, right? And so we're going to educate around more than just, oh, you shouldn't have it because it's bad for you. I think it's such a more complex psychological topic than that. So we're going to go really deep. Now, as a disclaimer, right, we are not alcohol or addiction specialists here at PCC. So if you find that your relationship with alcohol is significantly impacting your quality of life, your relationships, and your overall ability and your behaviors throughout the day, we do recommend seeking professional support from either a licensed therapist or an addiction specialist if you do feel like this truly is an issue that is taking over your life. So first and foremost, we do want to educate around alcohol as a whole. We don't want to skip over that point. So what is alcohol? Technically, alcohol is not made of carbs and it's not made of fats, and it's kind of its own macronutrient. So it is the fourth macronutrient. It has some of the molecular properties that make it a little bit more similar to fat and fat molecules, but it's really just not either of carbs and fats. But we have ways that we can track alcohol to make it fit into our goals that we can get into here. One thing to know about alcohol that I think many of us are aware of, but we tend to forget or ignore because we like it for many different reasons, is that alcohol is a toxin. With that, it is something that the body wants to get rid of immediately. So when we have alcohol, its digestion and excretion is immediately prioritized compared to the other macronutrients. So basically what happens is if you're eating a meal with alcohol, your body basically puts the digestion of everything else on pause to be like, hey, let's get this out of here, right? Because it is a toxin to the body, so the body is trying to get rid of it as quickly as possible. Where there's a downside there is basically because there are calories in alcohol, your body is going to prioritize the digestion and utilization of the calories from alcohol first. And then if there are leftover calories from food, or you eat more food as a result of drinking, you could easily be put into a caloric surplus, and the digestion of those food molecules might be delayed and therefore just sit in your bloodstream, as well as not be digested as efficiently. So with that, the impact of alcohol, while there are impacts on things like our sleep, alcohol can lower the quality of the sleep that we have when it's in our system. It can impact our hormones. Alcohol can mess with estrogen detoxification and production. So having hormonal conditions plus alcohol can kind of make that worse. And then just the overall effects that we know that it has on things like dehydration, our energy, our mental cognition, especially the next day or when we're recovering. Outside of that, one of the biggest impacts that alcohol has on our fat loss journey is the caloric content and that redistribution of where our body is digesting food, and basically just making it harder for us to stay in a caloric deficit for a couple of reasons. The caloric reason, which is basically you're just adding calories to your day, whether it's from alcohol or from the mixtures that go in mixed drinks, or number two, the psychological effects of being under the influence, making it much harder for us to stick to non-negotiables or follow through on our goals, because we tend to have a more free mindset of like, oh, I'll just do whatever right now, screw it. And a lot of those inhibitions that we put up to keep ourselves motivated and disciplined tend to fall off when we are under the influence. So here's where people go wrong. I see all the time when clients are trying to reduce their alcohol consumption, they're trying to cut it out entirely. They're making it a bad thing to have. They're putting morality around drinking, and they are trying to either cut it out or distract themselves from it, which is not a method that is going to stick. So for example, when you just cut something out, we know this with food too, when we just restrict, what happens psychologically is we focus on it more and more. So if I said, don't think about cute puppies right now, what are you immediately thinking of? Like golden retriever just popped in your head, a Labrador retriever just popped in your head. In mine, a Rottweiler just popped in my head. That is what happens when we restrict and say we can't do something. And so for example, when a lot of people go through dry January, what do they really want to do the first day of February? They want to have a drink because they've been craving it so much, thinking about it so much. And so these distraction techniques or these abstinence techniques sometimes can work. And for some people, they are the answer. But for others, moderation is probably a better way to go. So there's a lot to unpack here when it comes to changing our alcohol habits, because unlike food, alcohol is a drug and it is a toxin that has much more potent effects in the brain and in the body that makes it a harder habit to kick. And so something that a lot of coaches and I think a lot of us miss when we're trying to make changes to this habit is first figuring out where we're actually at with wanting to make this change. Because I think many of us will say in passing that we want to stop drinking or drink less, but when it really comes down to it, we might not be fully fleshed out in those motivations. And so this is where we're going to reference a couple of prior modules from the Accelerator course and tie things together. I like to use the motivation matrix with clients when determining how exactly they want to move forward with changing their alcohol consumption. So the motivation matrix, if you remember, is 4 quadrants of what happens if I make this change or I don't make this change, and what are the pros and the cons. And so it's really important here to give yourself a fair assessment with both sides of the equation for the benefits of changing and not changing and the cons of changing and not changing. Because a lot of times it's the things that we're benefiting from continuing the behavior that keep us doing it. And we really need to be able to weigh out with everything in mind, what do we value more and what are we going to want in our future more? So I would start there, because when it comes to making these behavior changes, what we don't realize is we're often kind of a step behind where we'd like to be when it comes to where we're at mentally with making a change. So I'll bring some psychology into it real quick. If you've never heard of the trans-theoretical model of change, I'll put an image on the screen here. Essentially, it's just a model to show that change takes a lot of contemplation from somebody. And so a lot of us, when it comes to kicking an alcohol behavior and even making healthy lifestyle changes, we're likely probably in the contemplation phase rather than the preparation and action phase. And a lot of us try to jump and skip, and we say, well, I'm just gonna cut out alcohol, and that's a preparation or action thing that we do. When in reality, we really need to get ourselves through that contemplation phase thoroughly to get into action in a way that's actually going to stick. And so what that looks like is that pros and cons matrix, and really thinking through, what does making this change really mean to me, and how is it more worth it than the alternative of staying the same? That way we don't just bang our head against the wall trying to make a change but actually see nothing happen in real life. Step 2 when it comes to changing your habits with alcohol is understanding how habits are formed and how they're settled in the first place. So I'm going to use this cue habit reward cycle that, again, we're bringing some psychology, some neuroscience into this, but this is from the book The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. And it's a wonderful book, by the way, but it illustrates how every single habit has a cue, so a trigger, something that makes you want the thing or want to do the behavior. The habit itself is the behavior, so in this case, drinking the alcohol, and then the reward. What is the actual physical, psychological reward that we're getting from the alcohol? And so for alcohol, it's really intertwined, right? So the cue can be many things. It could be social pressure, it could be internal pressure, it could be stress, it could be emotions, it could be an association, it could be a lot of things. So we have to understand what the cue is. We also have to understand what the rewards are. And so the rewards are very deeply intertwined, because we do have a dopamine response in the brain. We do have a physiological response of stress relief in the body and muscle relaxation. We also probably have social rewards for drinking with friends, maybe deeper connection, memories that we make, things like that, that enhance the experience overall. And so the immediate reward that we get is typically very strong from alcohol. And so when we're trying to change this habit, the key here is to change the habit, but keep the cue and the reward as similar as possible. And this is hard because you're trying to mimic the effects of a drug, right? And so with that, you want to think, what are my specific cues and triggers? And what are my specific rewards that I'm gaining from this? And this is why doing the motivation exercise before is going to be that much more powerful, because you're going to understand what you're actually getting out of this behavior and what might be able to start to take the place there in the habit section that's going to mimic the reward as much as possible. Now, listen, we're not looking for perfect. There might not be anything that 100% gives the exact same effect as drinking the alcohol, but you want to look for good enough and something that is worth the trade-off to you, right? That gives you all the benefits without all of the side effects or repercussions after, or at least 80 to 90% of them. The reality is that we do need to experiment a bit when it comes to changing out the habit, right? And so what I want to also refer back to is our RAIN method. This is a method that we use to help with emotional coping responses with food or overall self-sabotage like behaviors when faced with stress or emotions. And there, if you remember, are energizing and soothing activities that are suggested based on those emotions. And these can also be used and tested to figure out what kinds of habit changes are going to work for you when it comes to your alcohol habit. So give it some time, give it some trial and error. It's definitely not going to change overnight, but figuring out what your specific cues and rewards are is going to be worth the investigation. Now, lastly, the third step when it comes to changing your alcohol habits and behaviors is going to be celebrating small wins along the way and really just knowing what the bigger picture is, because the reality is this isn't going to change overnight. It's probably going to be a process that isn't going to feel like it's getting better for a while before it does. So for example, if somebody drinks, let's say 20 drinks per week on average, and they bring that down to 16 or 17, are they going to honestly feel that different at a baseline? Probably not, right? Because there's still a lot of alcohol being processed through the system on a regular basis. But we have to learn to celebrate those things as wins. And that's where your coach comes in to really point those things out in case you miss them, because that is how you're going to build momentum. If you don't celebrate the wins, you will continue to feel stuck and then not take as much action forward. In addition, you can use any mistakes or failures, quote unquote, to reflect with how it felt in your body after the fact to try to build the reward circuit of why don't I want to keep doing this? So for example, if you end up drinking too much in this process of trying to change and you don't follow through, use the body food choice congruence worksheet and journaling exercise, another prior resource that we have that you can basically reflect on how did that make me feel? Would I want to repeat that or not? And really get in touch with your values and why you prefer something different. Lastly, it's really important that you just know the bigger picture. And so one question that I encourage everybody who's watching this to really think about is, what do you want your relationship with alcohol to look like? Not just right now or next week, but in the bigger picture, in the next 10 years, how do you want to operate with alcohol? And there's no right or wrong answers with this. You just need to be honest with yourself, because if you know the answer to that and you understand the bigger picture, then we can reverse engineer this. We can work backwards from where do we eventually want to be with our relationship with alcohol, and how can we take steps there? So that way it's a guided habit change towards what you really want in the long run. And when there's alignment, action comes easier. Lastly, that answer can be drinking in moderation. That answer can be not drinking at all. And just be honest with yourself there, and then we can provide the resources either way. So below, you're also going to find our low-calorie alcoholic beverages guide. So that way you can put together some cocktails and drinks that are going to be easier on the waistline and easier for you to fit in to a fat loss and lifestyle change journey without having to sacrifice as much of your food intake and things like that. Because when it comes to alcohol, you can track it and integrate it into a caloric, a macronutrient intake, but we want to make sure that we are accounting for it so it's not just hitting calories that are sabotaging our progress without us realizing, right? So all of the instructions for how to track alcohol, how to get that fitting into your diet, and the best drinks that we recommend to do that is going to be below, linked in a resource, but really just reflect on those questions with yourself and with those psychological processes to unwind this habit. And don't be afraid to lean on your coach when you're working on this, because it is something that's going to be really deep and takes a lot of time. So be patient with yourself and just know that if there's alignment there with your values, you're going to get there eventually, as long as you don't give up. So keep up the awesome work. I'll see you in the next module.